It's time to accelerate. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Join me as I host conversations with the leading experts in sales, marketing, sales automation, sales process, leadership, management, training, coaching, any resource that I believe to help you accelerate the growth of your sales, your business, and most importantly, you. Hello and welcome to Accelerate. I am really looking forward to talking with my guest today. Joining me is John Barrows, founder of Barrows Limited, sales trainers, the world's leading tech companies. If you've been to a tech conference, you've heard John speak undoubtedly. And I'll tell you before we get started, is people listening, there are hundreds, if not thousands of sources of good sales information available to you out there, books, blogs, podcasts, and so on. Some good, a lot of it not so good. But if you're listening to this podcast, I know you appreciate thoughtful, quality content about sales. And so I don't plug my guests very often before the show, but if you're not following John, you should. Great blogs, good videos, great newsletter, good, solid, sensible, practical sales advice, which I really appreciate. John, welcome to Accelerate.
Thank you very much, Andy. I appreciate it.
Yeah, good stuff. So tell us, how'd you get your start in sales?
Oh, just kind of like everybody else, I fell into it. Since there's very few majors in sales these days, it's getting better. But
what was your major at school?
It was marketing. The typical. Okay. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but
I was a history major. It could have been worse.
There you go. Almost as useless, but no, I'm kidding. But I got marketing and kind of got recruited out of University of Maryland with DeWalt Power Tools, which recruited heavily out of there, and it was a sales position, but it really wasn't sales. It was more event marketing, driving around giving away free tools to construction workers, which was pretty awesome because I love DeWalt Power Tools, so it made it easy. And then graduated within DeWalt to selling to Home Depot, so taking a deal from a $10,000 order to a $50,000 order by doing end caps and promotional stuff. So it was a little bit more sales. And then,
but working with individual store managers or regional managers to set up the displays at the end caps and so on.
Exactly. So I had the territory here in Boston. It was one of the top territories in the country, and working with those store managers and helping figure out how to place the stuff so we can sell through, and doing different events and stuff like that at the different stores. And so from there, I didn't want to move all over the place, because that's what the DeWalt culture was all about, is like every 6 months you had to move to a different region or whatever. And so I ended up getting a job with Xerox selling copiers, and that's really where I got my formal sales training, because they have that really solid, sales training program. It's an 8-week sales training program that's pretty well regarded, even though I didn't know it at the time. And, selling copiers, I think if anybody's ever sold copiers, they know they definitely learn how to sell and take rejection pretty quick because it's a straight up commodity sale.
Exactly.
And I also sold to the government too, so it wasn't even, I couldn't even negotiate on contract. It was one of those things where my price was my price, and there had been 5 or 6 reps in the territory for over the course of 3 years, so there was no trust or anything like that. So it was a challenge that really helped me understand about relationship selling and building rapport and getting people to trust me, so that eventually I could sell them what made sense, even though I almost got fired from my boss early on because I really didn't sell much for 6 months. They put me in territory pretty quick because of however I interviewed, and 6 months into it, my boss is like, "Hey, you haven't sold anything yet. If you don't, you're going to be fired." I'm like, "Would you just calm down here a minute? You put me in this territory for a reason. You guys have ravaged this for the past 3 years. There's no trust built here." And so, because I did the relationship building stuff and really earned the trust, after about 7 months, I ended up just crushing it, because I brought a plan to every single one of my accounts with their click-through rates and strategy of how to flip over all their old stuff into new stuff, and kind of walked into his office after a while and just dropped like 4 huge contracts on his desk. I'm like, "All right, you happy now?" And he didn't really appreciate that too much. So our relationship wasn't too solid. I knew early on.
And then you were gone.
Yeah, well, I knew early on I was a pain in the ass to work with. And so, I always had kind of that entrepreneurial spirit. My parents were both contractors and consultants. So even though I didn't know it, that's kind of what I grew up with. And, the corporate world just didn't fit for me. I didn't like the, hey, you have to spend 2 years doing this, then 2 years doing that, then 2 years doing this. I was like, hey, why don't I get promoted based on performance here? And that wasn't the way it worked there. So an opportunity came up where a good friend of mine from high school started a company, an outsourced IT services company, small, self-funded, and needed some help with sales. And so I jumped on board as the fourth member there, and really, had no idea what I was doing when I was 23 years old. So I took every training there was: Sandler, Miller, Hyman, Taz, Spin, you name it, I was taking it. And I came across Basho. It was a training that I really, really liked. And
what was it called again?
It's called Basho. Basho Technologies or Basho Strategies. It was a local training company here in Boston that really just out of nowhere had some insane clients, and Symantec and all these people, all these huge companies. And, I took the training. It was a workshop. I thought it was fantastic because it was very tactical and execution oriented as opposed to strategy or methodology oriented. And I'm a very tactical, like, hey, how do you do this? Let's not talk about the theory of sales. Let's talk about how to actually do this. And it resonated with me. So when I ended up growing Thrive Up, using those techniques, helping grow Thrive, and we were the fastest growing company in Massachusetts for a few years in a row, got us to about 85 employees and about 12 million in revenues. And then we sold off to Staples. So Staples came and bought us, and spent about a year going through that integration. And again,
deciding you don't want to work for big companies.
Yeah, I came back. Well, I thought it was a challenge. Like for me, 7 years in, and it's interesting this comes up today because I actually just got a call from a friend who, he brought his company to 15 million, and now the executives are looking to hire an SVP of sales who's been there, done that, to take them to the next level. And I think one of the most important things you can do as, in business, especially in the startup world, in any world, is to really understand your fit and where you fit in the world of business. Whether it's, are you a startup guy and you like the chaos up to a certain point? Are you the guy that once the structure's in place can take it to the next level? Or are you the IPO and, public company where you can fit in that structure and all that bureaucracy? I found out with Staples that I was more the startup guy. I was more I like chaos. I hate bureaucracy. I hate red tape. And I just don't play well. I don't know how to play the political game. And so after a while, Staples recognized that, and they offered me another position, which was a nice way of firing me.
Right.
And
it was in Alaska.
Yeah. And so eventually they, so I was looking for another job, and Basho came knocking and said, "Hey, John, do you want to be a trainer?" And I at first I was like, absolutely not, and they said, "Why not?" I said, well, because the majority of sales trainers that I had experienced up until that point in my career, there were two types: either failed sales professionals or professional presenters. It was somebody who couldn't do it, so they, you hold the whole adage of, if you can't do it, train it, or you can't do it, teach it. Or somebody who had been, hey, 20 years ago back in my day when I was selling, and I didn't want to be a part of that. And they said, well, John, don't worry, you have to use these techniques that we're going to train you on to sell so you can get paid. So I actually had to sell my own training, which I liked. And so I used the techniques, got onto Basho, brought on some of the bigger accounts, took over some of the bigger ones. And then about a year and a half into that one, new CEO came in, restructured the company to focus on technology, ended up firing 30 to 35 of us on the spot, and really just left the training on the side of the road to die. And I've always said I'm not the smartest cat out there, but I'm definitely an opportunist. And so I walked into his office and just said, hey, what are you going to do with the training? And he didn't have a great answer. And so I said, well, what if I started a company, took over the clients from a training perspective, gave you some resale. You keep the deposits on the training that's out there. I'll keep the receivables, and then I'll send you a reseller fee, and we're good to go. And he was like, all right, make it happen. So I took one of the other trainers with me, and we started a company called Kensei Partners, which was fun for a while. And then about 3 years ago, I split off on my own, mainly to focus on the SaaS industry. I mean, Salesforce.com is my biggest client. And so with that ecosystem, I really wanted to kind of focus on the innovation and the drive and the push, because I really like the energy of the SaaS world. Not only do they lead the way in technology, but they also push the envelope when it comes to sales. So it keeps me on my toes, and it keeps me it forces me to evolve. Right. Which is fun. So
excellent. Okay. So let's talk about one of your recent blog posts, which serve a good segue from sales training. And I love the title. You said, you can't wait for sales training to get better. If you're a sales rep, you can't wait for sales training to get better. You have to take some responsibility for educating yourself and improving. So what should a rep do?
Yeah, I mean it's interesting now because a lot of reps will wait for them to have somebody else tell them what to do, and I've never been that way in my career. I've always been I got to figure this out. Even leads that related to inbound leads, I never relied on inbound leads to hit my quota. I always thought that as the icing on the cake, right? So I want to always go out and find my own business. Same thing with training. I mean, there's so much content out there. There's so much good and bad, like you talked about before. But it's actually not that hard to train yourself these days. I mean, the content game, as you and I both know, I knew about, I think it was like a year and a half ago when LinkedIn bought Linda, I knew the content game was dying really quick, because if you came out with a new methodology or a new technique or whatever, within a day, somebody's going to write a blog post on it and it'll be out there for free. And so that's, to me right now, there's so much information out there that really the key is trying to filter it all through and find out what's good and what's bad and where should we focus our efforts. And the one thing I would say to reps who are listening here, somebody asked me, John, now that you're 40, if you could go back and tell your 22-year-old self something, what would it be? And my number one answer to that was A/B split testing. Mm-hmm. And, A/B, trying different approaches. And, figuring out one issue that you're having, whether it's an objection or dealing with gatekeepers or trying to get into talk to CFOs or whatever.
Or even a behavior of your own.
Yeah, even a behavior of your own, whatever it is, and coming up with two different approaches to it. And then really being thoughtful about how you do that and saying, you know what, I'm going to try this approach 10 times and I'm going to try another approach 10 times. And I'm going to see which one yields a higher response rate. And I think that's the way that we can train ourselves to get better every day. I mean, I'm writing a post now that's going out tomorrow called The Rule of 1%, which is one of my 12 guiding principles, which is, live your life by the rule of 1%, set the bar at a high but attainable level, but then every day just try to get 1% better. Mm-hmm. And, a way to do that is, to identify things that you want to work on, not necessarily your weaknesses. I'm not a big believer in focusing on your weaknesses. I'm a big believer in focusing on your strengths, but I am also a believer in trying different things out to figure out what your strengths actually are. Because especially as a young sales rep, you don't really know what you don't know yet. You're in that kind of unconsciously incompetent world, and you're saying, okay, well, I got to figure this out. What's my style? What's my approach? And by taking that split test mentality and absorbing the information that's out there in a filtered way, you can start to get better a lot faster, and you don't have to rely on training for somebody else to come in, for instance, to sit through a day session or whatever to get better. Because it's about those nuggets and tips. It's not about the big, long, whatever. What frustrates me about sales training and sales books is that, you usually sit through an entire day of sales training and you walk out with one or two nuggets, mm-hmm. and you're like, oh, that was great. And it's like, you had to sit there for 8 hours to get what to put in a subject line, really? Or, where, I know context is important and stories are great and that's what I do, but I try to kind of cut through all the crap and say, look, this is what you should be focusing on. And so that you're walking out of here with at least more than one or two. But I think those one or two nuggets are all over the place. I mean, there's blogs, there's, different ebooks, there's millions of things out there from a content standpoint. And by looking for it and trying different things out, you can start to figure out what works for you instead of what works for everybody else.
Exactly. And I love the 1% perspective. I wrote a post similar to that a year and a half or so ago about having read an article, because I believe that, but I read this article about the guy that manages, I don't know if you're a bicycle racing fan, Tour de France fan, but the guy that runs the Sky team that has been the best team that had the three champions, 3 or 4 of the last 5 years. And that's exactly what he does. He calls it the aggregation of marginal gains. Mm-hmm. Just what can I do to get 1% better, 0.5% better, on these various things across the board. And it's not like any one of them is revolutionary.
No.
It's just, I'm working to make it slightly better. If I can make it slightly better, that gives me that slight advantage. And, as I tell people when I talk to them about sales, is, you only have to be 1% better to win.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes all the difference. I mean, if you look at the races right now in the Olympics, a lot of these come down to that half a second that, which is that extra stroke or whatever it is that player, that person did to get the gold medal instead of the silver. And I'm always shooting for the gold. So
yeah. So, okay. Well, that's a great one. I love that. So a question that's sort of an interesting question I think in this regard is, you're talking about test and experiment, which I think is fantastic, is how much time should a rep budget for self-improvement? And really, even how much money necessarily should they budget of their own for self-improvement, let's say on an annual basis?
Yeah, I mean, I think time every day, it's tough because the expectations of reps, depending on what company you're in, there's always whatever the metrics are, right? Make 50 dials, do this, do that, go on this many meetings. So it's really hard to fit that in. But people say they don't have time, which cracks me up because they think, just because I got too many things to do. And that's not the case. The real reason people don't have time is because they're not focused, right? They're all over the place in what they do. I always say, if you say you're a good multitasker, I'm going to tell you straight up, you're very inefficient in what you do. Mm-hmm. Because the book called Myth of Multitasking talks about how the brain can't do more than one thing at the same time. And so I think
how much time you waste trying to go from task to task. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
The interrupts are fairly substantial in terms of time consumption.
And it kills momentum and everything else. And so that's where I think the biggest key is really to look at your days and really structure them out, set good goals, own your calendar, that type of thing. Because if you do that, you can really find the time. I just do an hour, my routine is, everybody, I've been doing a lot of reading about people and successful people. And, one thing that comes up a lot is this whole notion of a routine, where really successful people have a routine that they go through on a daily basis. Really successful athletes, they listen to a certain playlist, they stretch out a certain way, whatever, to get their mind in the right mood. And I try to implement that into my day-to-day routine with every morning. So, I learn something every day, because instead of checking my fantasy leagues or reading the paper, which is fine. My dad still to this day, he reads the morning paper and drinks his coffee to get into his day. What I do is there's all these tools out there that you can have information come to you that you should be learning about, that you want to learn about. Like I use a product called Feedly. It's Feedly. It's a RSS aggregator that basically allows me to, create a folder, for instance, called sales blogs, and then go find the top 5 or 6 or 10 sales blogs that I like reading and put them into that. And when I open up that folder, it shows the headlines of all the blogs. So I can kind of scan through the headlines and look for good things to talk, to read about, things that I'm interested in. Or if I'm focusing on the SaaS industry, that's the main industry I tend to focus my efforts on. I want to go find the thought leaders in SaaS and what are they talking about? What are some of the trends out there to educate myself on what's happening? If I'm selling to CFOs, well, I'm going to follow some of the top CFOs in certain industries and listen to what they're saying and just read a few posts. I'm not a big book reader. Like I don't have a lot of time to sit down and read a 200-page, 300-page book, but I love the blog post format where it's, 3, 4, 5 paragraphs. I can pick up a nugget or two. And so every morning I read my morning paper and scan through all that stuff and look for interesting things. And that's how I tend to educate myself and get that much better every single day, in addition to obviously following what my clients are doing and getting alerts on, triggers and those type of things that I can use to make connections with them on.
Yeah, and I think it's a great approach. I mean, I'll advocate for reading books, not just because I write books, but I'm a little bit of a skeptic when it comes to a lot of the sales books. I mean, in terms of, the first 50 pages are mostly what you need to read. Right. But exactly. Having done that, you're 3/4 of the way through it. But yeah, turn off the TV for an hour a night and read a book. We're actually doing an interesting thing with one of my clients right now is they've set aside time in the business day every day, 15 minutes, that all the sales reps read. And they've got an assigned book of the month. So we're doing a book of the month club for 12 months, and they're all reading the same book, and they're given time during the business day to read it. And so at the end of the year, they'll have read 12 books that they would never have read before. And if, as you said, if they pick up just 1 or 2 nuggets from each one, we're well ahead, and probably much more further ahead than if they had invested $20,000 on sales training.
Well, that's it. And then, your question about how much they should invest from a cash standpoint, I mean, I don't think you have to invest anything. I mean, the information's out there. It's just you got to go find it and make the time to go look through it. I used to do that as a VP of sales. I used to do the same thing. I forced my reps. There was a recurring meeting on their calendar every day at 6:00 for 15 minutes. And all it said was think. And all I wanted them to do was put down their laptops, put down their phone, and think about their day and how it went, and also plan for the next day. Mm-hmm. And the amount of productivity gains that they got from just planning out the following, the next day and what they were going to do and what their goals were was off the charts. And some of the ideas that came out of that brief 15 minutes were off the charts too, because they'd be like, hey, you know what? I thought about it today. I really was taking this approach. I don't think it worked all that well. I'm going to try this tomorrow. And then tomorrow they'd come in and come back and say, wow, I tried that. It worked great. I'm looking forward to tomorrow, those type of things. So there's little things that you can do, but I think owning your calendar, setting goals, using a lot of tools that are out there to filter information, have it come to you instead of you always having to go to search for it, are easy ways where you can educate and train yourself without having to spend a dime on it.
All right, let's talk about some other sort of practical approaches to problem solving. You've written recently about demonstrations, talking about SaaS spaces, demos, and that, they're happening way too early in the process. So let's talk about that. So what do you see happening? I mean, you're involved with a lot of companies, and we have a lot of people in the SaaS business that listen to this.
Yeah, it's brutal. The reps, I wrote a post a while ago called The Death of the Average Sales Rep. And I don't say death of sales reps. Sales are always going to be around, but I think the average sales rep is going to die a painful death because, the ones going through the motions, blasting out template emails, making generic cold calls, asking basic BANT questions, and press and play on demos. And it amazes me every week I go through demos. And, because a lot of people, and I'm sure you do the same thing, a lot of people will call us up and say, hey, John, I got this new cool tool. Could you take a look at it? Love to get your feedback. And also, could you recommend me to some clients? And I'm always up for it because I want to see what's out there. I want to see the new stuff. But every single demo is exactly the same. They start off, "Hey, okay, John, thanks for your time. Is this still a good time?" Yeah, it's on my calendar. Yes. And then they'll, "Okay, well, we're going to about a 30-minute demo here, and let me know if you have any questions as we go through it." And then they go, "Wah," and they just press play. And then, well, we were founded in June of 2000 by three, and they just go into this and it's like, and then they stop every once in a while and they say, "Does that make sense? Does that make sense?" Which I think is a terrible question, right? I used to ask that a lot too, by the way. I used to say, "Hey, does that make sense?" And never was somebody like, "No, man, that was so far over my head. I don't even know what you're talking about there." And even if they did say yes, it didn't tell me whether or not it made sense.
In their context.
Yeah, in their context. And so, they just go through it and they get there, they do it exactly the way they were taught in boot camp when they got their badge and they got certified on it. But it's just, and that's necessary. Like, I do believe it's necessary to get certified and, so that you can present it exactly the right way. But then if you don't make it your own, you're no different than marketing. Like I with a marketing background, I could put together a better demo than you can if all you're going to do is press play. My suggestion for reps who are out there looking at, putting together demos is if it's a half an hour demo, spend the first 10 minutes asking the client what their priorities are, what they want to see out of the demo, and then take that 30 slides or whatever it is and really cut it down to the 10 or so that are actually going to make a difference to the client and get your product or solution to stand out. And also, instead of asking, does that make sense? Pause at certain points of the discussion and say, you know what, I'm going to pause there. That was something that was a pretty big component of our solution. And you had said earlier that this is one of your priorities. I wanted to ask you, how do you see that fitting into your existing process? Or could you explain to me how that compares to how you're doing things now? Because the way that you explain it to me or, give me an example of how it fits into your existing process tells me everything I need to know on whether or not it made sense. And so just the context around it, that's something, so Gary Vaynerchuk, I'm sure you're aware of him. He got my attention early on when he said the context versus content.
Yep.
He said, everybody talks about content is king. And he said, well, if content is king, then context is God. And that got me thinking about sales versus marketing. And that's what it is. I think marketing is content. Sales is context.
It should be.
Yeah, and if you're not putting any context around the content, then you're no different than marketing. And I have no idea why you're getting paid commission.
Yeah, or you're not adding any value to the prospect if you're not providing context.
Yeah.
They can get the content online.
Exactly. Like the white paper email drives me crazy. The person that goes on the website and downloads the white paper, the email that a rep sends is the template. Hey, I saw you download the white paper. I'd like to talk to you about your 2016 priorities. Now we can help you achieve your goals. Like, I don't need you to do that. Like, first of all, if I wanted to talk to you about the white paper, I would have called you about it. Second of all, you sending me that email, I could configure Marketo, Eloqua, you name it, whatever the marketing automation.
Send the same email, yeah.
To send it better than you, by the way, because the tool's gonna allow me to analyze the results and figure out split test and figure out what's the best message to send you. So that's where I think the reps, if they don't wake up, I do believe that I think our job has changed in sales, and it is to, we used to be the people that had the information, and the client had to come to us or we had to come to them to show them, hey, you know what, here's this new cool thing. But now the information's out there. I do think it's our job to get our clients to think. Right. I think that today steady state is just not acceptable anymore because sales or technology is evolving so fast. There's not one industry right now that's safe as it relates to technology. And I use the dummy example like Uber. Do you think the taxi industry had any idea that Uber was coming? And obviously now they're trying to play catch up. And because of the hockey stick evolution of technology, there's not one industry out there that's safe, including sales. And the way I look at it is part of my job is to get sales reps to wake up and realize if they keep going through the motions, they're going to get replaced. And also their job as sales professionals is to get their clients to think, look, if you don't start looking ahead here, if you don't start evolving, you might be okay today, but tomorrow you might wake up and be out of work or out of a job. So I just want to share with you some of the new stuff it's working on, if for nothing else, to let you know what's out there.
But isn't it in a lot of cases, though, and this is a great topic of conversation, is that it really goes back to just doing the basics. I mean, it's not like there's anything brand new and revolutionary out there. They're in danger because they're not doing the basics.
Yeah, it's amazing. The fundamentals, anybody ever comes to tell you there's something new in sales, you just tell them to shut up, because everything is just an iteration of something that's already been out there. Now, the technologies and how we connect with people is different. Sure. But the foundational pieces, the structure, I always talk about the science versus the art of selling. It still amazes me how many people don't use agendas for meetings. It still amazes me how many people don't summarize the conversation after they have it with somebody and send it over to them to confirm that was something that, just to confirm that we heard the right things from you.
Or confirm appointments before they happen.
Confirm appointments.
Gosh, because the problem with, in SaaS business, talking about, gosh, what's the yield off of the appointments set by the SDRs? Mm-hmm. Well, I've worked with one company. It was pretty easy to get that yield rate up pretty substantially. Just do some more confirmation.
Yeah. I mean, I use this simple technique, and it's I call it a shared agenda. And the shared agenda is I send you an email today saying, hey, I'm looking forward to our meeting tomorrow. Wanted to make sure that we get the most out of our time together. Here's a few things that I want to make sure that we cover. What do you want to make sure what would you like to add? And I'll leave 2 or 3 bullet points, and then I'll leave 3 or 4 bullet points blank, and just say, hey, just fill in the blanks. When I get that email back, I know I'm in for a great meeting. When I don't, it's not that the meeting's going to be bad, but they're maybe not as engaged. And then I use that to help guide the conversation. Because if you're not using an agenda to guide the conversation, they're in control. You're not. Yeah,
absolutely. Right. And the other thing that just sort of, again, is back to the fundamentals is, and you're exposed to a lot of new reps in your business. You're working with the SaaS companies and so on. And is, how do you get people to focus on the other person? Because that is one of the most fundamental skills that's really missing. And the one that I think if you can't master, you are at risk of being replaced because you're not able to add any value if you can't make it about the buyer.
Yeah, it's and I think that has to do with the prep that you do prior to the conversation. I mean, if you're not preparing, if you're not looking at their website and doing at least a little bit of research before you have a conversation with somebody, inherently you have to make it about you. Then you're going to go through the motions of giving the pitch. But if you're genuinely curious and you look for those things to strike up interesting conversations about, I always just look for stuff that I'm curious about, based on your background, based on what's happening in your business, because that tells me on whether or not it's a good fit for you or not. Everybody always knows that if you talk more than the client does, then your chances of them buying anything from you are not high. But it's actually pretty easy to get people if you ask the right questions. And I think that's where regardless of how senior you are in sales or how experienced you are in sales, I think the thing that all of us need to get better at is asking better questions.
And the flip side to that is listening to the answer.
Oh, yeah.
So this is the one that drives me nuts, but the words I use when I work with companies and used it on the show many, many times is you have to learn how to listen without judgment. Mm-hmm. If you're asking a great question, don't presume you know the answer.
Right.
Listen without having the preconceived answer in mind.
Well, and that's why, preparing those questions actually beforehand is important, because If you don't, then you're just kind of making it up on the fly and you're thinking about what that next question should be as opposed to listening to what the actual answer is.
Mm-hmm.
And most people take the answer for face value, where the answer a lot of times isn't the real answer. I mean, we talk about my favorite type of question. I mean, there's open-ended and closed-ended questioning, but my favorite type of questioning is the layering questioning. Well, what do you mean by that? Could you explain to me how? Could you give me an example
Tell me more.
Yeah. And that's where I tend to get the best information out of people.
Exactly. That's a great question. I was going to bring that up. I'm glad you brought that up because, I mean, that's interesting. Tell me more, right? Or another one that somebody told me recently, he calls it the awe question. And what else?
Mm-hmm.
If you can just keep that in mind, you get these great follow-on questions that really start digging into what the customer is really concerned about.
Yeah. And the whole active listening thing. I mean, I think the people mistake active listening for, nodding their head and saying, yep, I actually think that's the actual opposite of it, right? I can always tell when somebody isn't paying attention to me when the yeps and the ahas come at all the wrong times. You know what I mean? Like I'm presenting something or I'm talking and you hear, yep, sure, yep, and you're like, yeah, that really wasn't an area where you should have said yep.
Right.
So, but if you summarize it back, let me make sure I'm clear with this. What you said was this, and you summarize it back to them. And that's why one of my favorite nuggets and tips that I share with clients and reps is that summary email, where after the conversation, and you have to let them know what's coming, by the way. So I say, hey, thanks for your time today, Andy. Some next steps and action items here. Before I go ahead and do all that, though, what I'm going to do is when we get off the phone here, I'm going to briefly summarize what I was able to gain from our conversation today. And I'm just going to send you over a quick email. Could you do me a favor and email me back to let me know if it's all accurate and if I missed anything? And I get you to say yes, right? And then right afterwards, I take all my notes and I crunch them down. This isn't an opportunity for you to write a book or reiterate your value proposition. This is purely to confirm what you heard from them. So thanks for taking the time. Below is a brief summary. Your current situation is this. Your priorities are this. Your timeline is this. Your decision process is this. Next steps, you're going to do this. I'm going to do that. So then you get them to confirm. First of all, that shows active listening, right? And a lot of times they'll correct me. Mm-hmm. And then now I have something to hold you professionally accountable for what you're telling me. Because 2 weeks later, I don't remember this conversation. And for you to try to remind me what I told you 2 weeks ago, please, I barely remember what I said 5 minutes ago, forget about 5 days ago.
Exactly.
But if you have an email and you're like, hey, John, and this is what you said, have things changed? Because if things have changed, let's get back on the phone, let's reset expectations here. But if they haven't, let's talk about this, right? Because I'm going to push you a little bit harder because you said your priorities and timeline were this. So that allows me to push you and do the challenger sales stuff or whatever, and because I have it documented.
Excellent. Well, if people are looking for one nugget to take away from this podcast, there's been many, but that was a good one right there.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites.
All right. So now we go to the last segment of the show where I've got some standard questions I ask all my guests. And the first one is a hypothetical scenario where you, John Barrows, have just been hired as VP of sales by a company whose sales have stalled out. And CEO is anxious to get things turned around. And I know it can't happen right away, but your first week on the job, what 2 things could you do that could have the biggest impact?
I would say meet with the happy customers and go find the customers that churned, and ask them why. I mean, that ultimately is why the company is or isn't doing well, is because if they're not doing well, then obviously customers aren't either getting the value out of the solution or the messaging about the value of the solution is not getting through. And so if my first goal is to, first of all, interview everybody in the company to understand, first of all, get my passion going about why should I be working here? I think the number one thing you need to be successful in sales is a belief in what you do. So I want to learn that company as much as I possibly can. And a way I do that is by obviously talking to as many people as I can within the organization, not just sales. I'm talking service, I'm talking engineering, I'm talking executives, whatever, but also more importantly, going out and really visiting customers and getting a really good understanding of how people get value out of the service and solution, what the difference is that we make, and if there really is a big difference. And again, also go try to find some customers that churned or go to find some customers that were unhappy with the service and find out why. Because in those answers, you'll find what you probably need to make as far as an adjustment, either from a messaging standpoint or from a delivery standpoint. And you'll also try to identify what that ideal customer profile is that everybody talks about. Because I think that's one of the keys to success with any business is really focusing in on exactly what that ideal customer profile looks like, and being very focused on it and not bringing on customers that don't fit that profile, as tempting as it might be.
As tempting as it is,
Exactly.
especially in early stages.
Absolutely. And you know what? You do have to take on, whoever. But what I would rather do, instead of taking on revenue early on, I would rather take on customers and give, a discount in return for a case study or a testimonial for that ideal client profile, because that's going to teach me a lot about where we add the right value. And then I can take that testimonial, case study, or whatever and parlay that into reaching out to other people like that target account.
Okay, excellent answer. So now some rapid fire questions. You can give me one-word answers or elaborate if you wish. So when you, John, are out selling your own services, what's your most powerful sales attribute?
I mean, I think just being very direct and transparent. I'm about as transparent as a seller as you get. I love sales. I hate the game of sales. I love, I set very clear expectations. I know exactly what I'm good at and what I'm not at. And I turn down more business than I bring on, because whenever somebody's trying to push something, trying to fit that square peg into the round hole, I don't do it. Even if they want me because they've heard about my training from other people, I'm like, nah, actually, I'm not a good fit, because I want to be able to make sure I can hit a home run, because that's what's gotten me where I am right now.
Okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that was it.
All right. So next question: who's your sales role model?
It's interesting. I don't think there's one particular one, but the guy Jeff Hoffman, it comes to mind. He's the guy that started Basho Strategies, and I still resell from him. He was somebody that I really appreciated as far as his approach and his mentality towards things. But I look at a lot of different people from a sales standpoint, and it's funny that it's not a lot of salespeople. It's people who are just passionate about what they do. And I can see that coming through them. So some business leaders that I know, just friends that are out there doing the right thing, selling the right way, because everybody thinks that sales is a profession. It's not. It's more of a mentality. I mean, it is a profession, obviously. But I wrote a blog post called the Founder's Dilemma a little while ago, where it's got that, that engineer who comes up with that awesome idea and goes out there and talks to people about it. And because they talk so passionately about it, because it's theirs, they figure, hey, this is easy, right? Sales is easy. And they hire people, and then the sales reps fail because they don't have that same passion.
Right.
So I look at, my mentors, or if you will, or, Jeff Hoffman, and a lot of my peers, Trish Bertuzzi, Lori Richardson, who's just a good friend. And I love her passion and her approach to sales. So a lot of those people.
Good. What's one book every salesperson should read?
Influence by Robert Cialdini.
Ah, great book.
Yeah. It's not a book on sales. It's a book on psychology and why we do the things the way that we do them, which I'm way more interested than sales techniques or tips or anything.
Yeah, and one of the great things about that book is he also tells you how you yourself fall victim to these, or fall prey to all these influence tactics that people use.
Absolutely.
So they can be misused as well, but great book. Okay, last question. So what music's on your playlist these days?
Oh man, I'm still old school. I'm a '90s rap kid, so I got Biggie, Tupac, a lot of that
Run
stuff.
DMC, okay.
Yeah, Run DMC. That got me hooked with a little bit of License to Ill with the Beastie Boys. But I'm a big fan of Jamiroquai. There's Parov Stellar. That's a kind of a 1920s swing band with a house beat to it.
Oh, interesting.
I'm all over the place with my music. I like country. I like house. I got rap and hip hop and everything else. As long as it's not too hard on one end or the other, I'll listen to it.
Excellent. Well, good. Well, John, thanks for being on the show today. Tell people how they can find out more about you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. You just go to jbarrows.com, so jbarrows.com. On there, I have a resource library where I give away probably 80 to 90% of what I do for free. I do have an online portal that has all the training that I give to Salesforce, LinkedIn, Box. I have that people can sign up for if they're interested. And you can follow me on Twitter and Snapchat. The handle's John M as in Michael Barrows, all one word, no spaces. I answer a lot of questions on Snapchat for kids who are having questions throughout the day. So, and then I got my blog, obviously, people can sign up for and get that weekly thing that goes out there.
Excellent. Again, thanks again. And remember, friends, make it a part of your day every day to deliberately learn something new, as we hope you did here today, to help you accelerate your success. And an easy way to do that is to make this podcast accelerate part of your daily routine, whether you're listening to commute, in the gym, or as part of your morning sales meeting. That way you won't miss any of my conversations with top business experts like my guest today, John Barrows, who shared his expertise about how to accelerate the growth of your sales. So thanks for joining me. Until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone. Thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you heard and want to make sure you don't miss any upcoming episodes, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher.com. For more information about today's guest, visit my website at andypaul.com.